All right, Steve, we're ready to go.
All right, thank you, Tom, and welcome everyone to OKI's demonstration of creating variable data jobs using Adobe In Design. My name is Steve Spatucci, Manager of Visual Assets for OKI Data Americas. Whether you're watching today from your home office, living room, kitchen, or any other place, my team and I are really glad that you could join us. Today, I'll be talking about variable data, applying unique data which can be text, images, or barcodes to create a printable multi-page PDF with each page customized for the target customer. These pieces can be mailings, personalized letters, target marketing pieces, certificates, really anything you or your customers may need to create with these types of varied elements. If you're targeting more elaborate mass mailings, there are dedicated VDP applications that offer features that InDesign doesn't have, such as sorting capabilities to reduce mailing costs. And furthermore, print speed can be optimized by using an EFI Fiery RIP, such as the Fiery C9 server. But today we'll be focusing on Adobe InDesign specifically for short runs of 2,500 pieces or less. And while most print shops have access to InDesign, we found that many of these shops either don't realize that the program can handle variable data, or they may know about InDesign, but they aren't sure how to use it for these kinds of jobs. Maybe they've even tried to run the program and run into a problem that they couldn't overcome. So we're going to cover the process today from start to finish, from working with a spreadsheet to exporting a CSV file, that's a comma separated values file, to then bringing that CSV file into Adobe InDesign, working with our layout and our variable data fields, and then exporting to a printable PDF file that we can be printing and opening from Adobe Acrobat or Reader, and finally, printing from our device. We'll also cover some tricky processes like merging field names, adding barcodes, and incorporating dynamic images. And once the live version of this webinar has concluded, we'll be posting a recording online and sending attendees a PDF with printed instructions, as well as a link to download all the files I'm working with today. So let's get started. First, I'm going to open my spreadsheet. Now you can work in Microsoft Excel, of course, the most popular spreadsheet application, but also Apple Numbers, which is what I'm working with here. And you can work in Google Sheets as well. Any spreadsheet app that can export to a CSV file. So let's take a look at this spreadsheet. I'm going to give you a quick overview. So we have a counter here, and I'll explain the function of that one later. We have the prefix, first name and last name. These are entries for a fictional animal society. We have a company name, which you can see is not always filled in. We have street address 1, street address 2, city, state, zip. Because it's an animal society, we have pet name and pet type. Now here we have a path that we'll fill in. This will lead us to the dynamic images from a folder saved in the same folder as our InDesign document. And here we have the final path that will be generated. And this will point to the file. I'll explain that in a moment. We have barcode information, which is just a number of characters. And finally, we have a couple fields here that we actually don't need to use. And that's okay, you can totally leave those in there. Now I wanted to talk for a moment about the column headers, which are the field names. You'll see I do have some spaces in here, but please refrain from using any unusual characters. They can cause chaos when you're working with InDesign. Straight letters and numbers are what you want to go with. And also note, when you're working with a dynamic image, some set of images that we'll pull into our layout, you have to begin that column header, that field name, with an @ symbol. And also note that even though Apple Numbers here does allow me to type @ and graphic in this case, Microsoft Excel does not. So if you're using Excel and you're working with dynamic images, you'll have to enter a single apostrophe like that so that it takes. Okay. So
Steve, just want to remind everybody about the Q&A at the bottom of the screen. If anybody has a question, you just hover down and at the bottom, there's a thing called Q&A, and you can type in your question.
Thank you, Tom. I forgot to mention that. Appreciate it.
Mhm.
Let's go back to our spreadsheet. So some of these fields are filled with formulas. Right now we have a counter here, and the counter field will allow for the job to be, it'll allow in case there's a jam that we can figure out where that jam took place. And this formula is simply getting the row name and subtracting 1 since our first row name is the header. Again, these files will also all be available for you to download. Now let's take a look at the first name, the prefix first name and last name. A lot of times you're working with a spreadsheet if you're a print shop and you have fields that are separated like this. And you may be tempted to manually copy and paste, but hopefully you haven't done that because there's a much easier way to do that. So what we're going to do here is I'm going to show you how to combine the prefix first name and last name. I'm going to create a new field, a new column. I'm going to name my column first last name. Give us a little room here. And I'm going to enter a formula. Now there's a couple different ways you can create a formula. You can do in your different application, you can insert one, but I'm just going to hit the equals key to initiate a formula. So what I'll be doing is combining this cell, B2, C2, and D2 along with spaces in between them. The way to do that is to say B2, ampersand, which is a concatenation tool. And that allows us to add a quotation mark, space, and quotation marks. And then we say ampersand C2, and then ampersand, quotation mark, space, quotation mark, D2, and click the green check, and we have the full name right there. All right, and so what's really nice is I can take the formula that lays behind this information and copy it. And then by holding down Shift, I can select all of the cells in that column and I can say paste. And what it will paste in is not the information, not Mr. David Cornborough, but it will paste in the underlying formula and that fills in all the remaining information. So it makes the job much easier. We'll do the same thing over here with city, state, and zip. And I will add a new column after. Give us a little more room once again and name it city, state, zip. Again, to initiate a formula, equal sign, we will say, in this case, I2, ampersand. Now we need to do quotation mark, comma, space after our city. Another quotation mark, ampersand J2, ampersand, quotation mark, space, quotation mark, and K2. There we have it, Hoboken, New Jersey, 17030. Copy the formula, select the rest of the cells in that column, paste. It's all in place. All right, so that makes our job much easier. Now, the next thing we need to do, we're good in every instance here, except we need to get the path for our dynamic graphic. Now, working with graphics in Adobe In Design using the merge tool is a little difficult. This is the trickiest step and it's the easiest one to get wrong. So very carefully, I'm going to show you what we're doing. Here is where my InDesign file resides, and you can see within that same folder, there's a subfolder called Images, where I have my animal images of a bird, cat, dog, rabbit, and a snake. So what we need to do to get the path is to take one of those images and drag it into our InDesign document. All right, so now we just have this temporary image here, and that's going to give us the path. Now this path varies on different platforms, so it's very important to do this correctly. We will go under, in InDesign, our links, under Window, under Links. We have the bird image selected, and under Options, which are the horizontal lines at the top right of the palette, go into Copy Info, and very important, select Copy Platform Style Path. If you select Copy Full Path, it will not work, it will not be the same. So copy platform style path. We're going to go back to our spreadsheet and paste it in here. And you can see it gives you a very specific, let me zoom out, very specific link that goes from the root of your drive all the way down folder to folder to the final file. Now I'm going to need to strip out the file name that comes at the end here and just leave it like that. So now what we have our pet name over here. We have the root path, and over here we have a formula that adds the pet name to the root path and adds .jpeg on the end. Okay, this is a little complex, but it's going to save you a ton of time if you're working with these kind of files. So now I'm going to copy that formula, that path, and paste it in. And we have full paths dynamically generated for each of our images. That way you don't have to go in here and edit manually bird, cat, dog, or whatever your specific information is. So our spreadsheet is done, and now we need to export it. And we are going to say file export, and we're going to export to a CSV file. CSV stands for comma separated values, and that's just a format that sends these kind of records out with commas separating them. Very easy, most common format for any type of program to interpret when it's pulling in this kind of information. Export it. I'm going to replace my existing file. And there we go. Now I'm going to go back to InDesign. I'm going to delete this bird image, but I'll tell you, if you hit delete earlier when you're copying the link information, you'll actually copy nothing to your clipboard. So make sure not to delete your temporary image too soon. Delete it now. And the next thing we need to do, we'll get rid of our links palette. We need to bring up the data merge tool within InDesign. And that's what we'll be working with. So under Windows, Utilities, bring up data merge. Very powerful tool. As I mentioned earlier, not everybody knows about this tool. So the first thing we need to do within data merge is to select the options and to select our data source, which is the CSV file that we just worked with. So mailinglist.csv, open. And immediately you will see that it brings in all of the field names, really the column names from the spreadsheet that we exported to the CSV, even the ones that we don't need, right? And you can see that there's one that is different, and that's the graphic. And that fact that we have a little icon of an image there instead of a capital letter T representing text means we've done what we needed to do. And we set that up properly with the @ symbol so that InDesign recognizes it as an image path rather than text. So I already have my layout here. You don't have to have a layout, but you could start from scratch, but I have this. So what I'm going to do is, let's go through quickly the layout of our envelope here. We have static information in the upper left, the return address. We have name, company name, street address 1, 2, and city, state, zip. We have a barcode, which is really just text. We have a QR code that's static, and there's a white box behind it. And then right here, we have a rectangular frame, a blank rectangular frame that we'll be assigning the image to. We have some text under here, some of which will be dynamic. And then over here in the lower right corner, we have a count number. You could probably disguise that better, but I've kept it pretty obvious there. And that will be our counter in case of any jams or problems printing. So now we need to go through and assign the field names, the applicable field names, to the areas of text. So I'm going to highlight full name and select our first last name field. And the double brackets indicate that it is now dynamic data. I will select company name, and it looks like InDesign's already trying to figure out that that's the correct field to connect it to. Street address 1, highlight and click. Street address 2, highlight and click. And city, state, zip, highlight and click. So we have our barcode here. Select all that and barcode. We have the pet name. Pet name. I'm going to do the count down here, and that is count. And finally, I will select the empty rectangular frame, and I will click on graphic. So it turns from an invisible frame to a dashed cyan or light blue outline, which indicates that it's now receiving the dynamic data. And another thing you might want to do here, you could do this after you generate your PDF, but look into the fitting. In this case, I'm going to say fit content proportionally so that every image fits as best as possible into that frame. All right, so everything should be set up now. And we now need to export to a PDF file. So we do that through Data Merge's PDF export, not through the main export under File that you're probably typically used to using. It has to be done through Export to PDF, and that will bring up a new window. So typically, all the defaults that you will see here are what you want to go with, but there's one that's probably critical to you that is most likely not defaulted on, and that is remove blank lines for empty fields. So when you have records that may contain a field or may not contain a field like company name or a second street address, you want to make sure that this remove blank lines for empty fields is set to be on. Otherwise, you're going to have an empty horizontal space when that information is not present. All right, so we'll say OK. And then you can generate your PDF. Now, you may want to look into downsampling. I have my bicubic downsampling set to 150 dpi. This is the place where you do that to reduce the file size, which would in turn maximize your print speed. All right. So I'm going to export my PDF. Save. Takes a moment.
Hey, Steve, while this is working, there's a question about whether there's a comparable way of doing this in CorelDRAW or Illustrator.
I don't believe, I'm almost certain there isn't for Illustrator because this is InDesign's Adobe solution. CorelDRAW, I'd have to look that one up. Thank you, Ted. We can look into that. So I'll open up the PDF. And here we have the final information. So we have our static information in the upper left. Oh, I did want to point out that InDesign will always give you this message here. So it's looking into the actual text that's laid down and making sure that it didn't overlay onto anything else. And that would happen if you had extremely long lines, maybe something so long that it pushed the fields down or fields overlapped. But when you get that message, you know that everything's okay. So stop that from popping up. Go back to our PDF. And again, so static information up here. We have our name, company name in this case, street address, no street address too, so there's no blank line here. We have our city, state, and zip. We have a barcode down here. We have the pet's name incorporated into here, and of course the dynamically selected pet image. And over here we have job number 1. So I'll page through. And job number 2, different information. In this case, we have a suite number. The barcode, you can see if I go back and forth, the barcode is changing because that's based on the characters in the document, the original spreadsheet. Everything's changing. Go through. And that's how you work with InDesign and InDesign's data merge tool to create variable data documents. A little tricky in some spots, but again, if you join us late, I'll remind you that we're going to make instructions as well as these files available for you to work with at home if you'd like to replicate the process, and I recommend that you do. It's much easier if you go through some files that are already set up before you try to create your own if you're not used to this kind of thing. All right, so thank you. If we have Q&A questions, I can answer them.
We just
So far, the only question had to do with Illustrator and CorelDRAW. If anybody else has any questions, feel free to use the Q&A bubble that pops up. It's right in the middle of the bottom of the screen.
Okay, I'm going to pop open our Q&A slide. So if you have any questions, you after the fact, if you're watching this on a recording, you can always email us at procolor@okidata.com or give us a call at 1-972-891-3304. Operators are standing by. I do see a couple other questions popping up. No, Jim?
Yeah, so we will send information. Please email us at procolor@okidata.com, and we will provide you with the information or at least the links to download any information.
Yep.
So Steve, do you see the questions?
Let me pull them up. I see them popping up now. I'm going to
So
have
one
to
of the questions is, can InDesign also do 2D barcodes?
not sure about that one either. I can look into that as well.
I think I've read that somewhere that they can.
Jim, there's a question for you or Ted. Without the fiery rip, how large a file will a printer be able to handle?
There's really no limitation on the size of the file. It's a matter of the complexity of each individual page. So at some point, because the data is being sent to the printer and being processed, at some point, it may bottleneck the printer and just simply slow down at a pace that's not optimal. It'll still print the entire document, but it might be very slow. The advantage of having a RIP is all the data is pre-processed before the first page is printed. That way you're just sending the raw data directly to the printer and you're able to optimize the speed of the printer. You'll be running the printer at full engine speed, and that really optimizes your running cost because you're getting every page you can out of the image drums.
Thank you. I do see another question here about interleave 2 of 5 barcodes. I'm going to have to look into that one as well. The real answer to any of those questions is that if it can be contained in a spreadsheet, or if it's graphics whose link can be pointed to in a spreadsheet, then the answer is yes. I do see interleave barcodes. I do see a definition, but we'll have to look into that to see if to find out a definite answer of whether or not that can be handled this way.
How will we get that answer to Mindy then?
Okay.
After the fact, will that go out in the notes?
We can. We'll have her email address, so we can.
Okay. All right.
So Steve, there's a question from Sean. Is it best to remove the static layer and run on the OKI with the nesting method? Are you familiar with that?
I'm not familiar with the nesting method. Is that, I would assume that would be a way to maybe keep the static information from processing every time. I'll have to look into that. And if it is, I'll have to get you a better answer. I don't know, especially since most of the information that is changing, that is taking up more real estate, more printer processing time. It would be something like the dynamic images. I don't know that would buy you much, but we can get you an answer on that too.
So everybody that attended today's webinar will receive a thank you, and we'll be sure to post a link to the video in that thank you email. And at that point, you can always reach out to us directly at procolor@okidata.com if you have additional questions.
Yep, and I do see that Mark has come back and said that Illustrator does have a data merge feature. Apologies on that, but he says it's more cumbersome to use, and he provides a link, so I will look into that. If it's more cumbersome to use and you have the Adobe suite, I'm going to guess that you're going to want to go with InDesign, especially because that's what most people are using to lay out your final documents. But we'll look into that. Thank you, Mark. Every other question I see, we're going to have to answer separately, or we will. Sean.
Yes. Yeah, we are going to post the video, which is one of the questions, correct?
Right. Yeah.
Another question came in: how fast would this job run on the OKI printer? Now, let's assume without the fiery rip, it would run pretty much at engine speed, full engine speed. The image themselves, as Steve pointed out, they're only 150 DPI, which is more than enough to get great looking images out of the OKI printer. So therefore, we're not overloading the amount of data that's being transferred to the printer, and then the printer would have to process on each individual page. So the printer would be able to run at full engine speed with this job.
Which is?
That's about 50 to 60 envelopes a minute.
Right, yeah. At least, I would think.
And that's going to be dictated by how well it fuses as well. So with large images like this, you have to set the paperweight so that it will fuse properly. And the heavier the paperweight, the slower the machine goes. So we'll be able to run in that range as fast as possible, as long as you're getting a good fuse.
All right. It looks like Well, Simon says bottleneck can be the network for large files as well.
Absolutely. But I don't think, Steve, how big is the file that you created?
Now let's check. So I did bicubic downsampling. Some of those animal images were quite large, and some were barely larger than the actual layout. So it was 448K, so half a meg. Fairly small.
So each page is less than 100K, which I think is fairly light.
I would say so. All right. I'm going to say that's all the questions we can answer now. We will get back to everyone who's asked something more specific in an email, and everyone will receive a link to the recording, a PDF with instructions, as well as a zip file of all the files I'm working with now. We can't redistribute these specific images, but you will get a generic version so that you can work with them and at least see that the image is changing per record. Oh, so I do see one more. The questions are coming in. Will this work the same way with 4 or 5 color, everything else being the same? Well, from the part of the process that I've showed you, Chris, yes, nothing is going to change. If you're talking about incorporating white, which was a bit too much for us to get into today, the process would be the same. There's different ways that we can set up white files for OKI printers, and some of them would allow for us to use black to represent white, and others would use a different setting that would combine Illustrator In Design's white with some color, and there's a third method that requires the creation of a spot color. If it was that method requiring the creation of a spot color, which is that uses the setting we call application specification, the only change in the process besides setting up your file correctly would be to export. When we go to export from InDesign, I'm going to pull it up here, you would have to say export to PDF, and after you selected from the first screen, I'm getting my Q&A on top of my panel here, you would say, I'm once again getting my Q&A covering up my panel. Give me a moment, please. All right, there we go. We would say PDF standard X1A 2001, which is the file format or standard of PDF that allows a custom spot color swatch to carry over from Illustrator, InDesign, or Photoshop into the final PDF. So as far as the creation, yeah, if you're familiar with the way things are created for our OKI printers that use white, you'd use the same methods, and if it had a custom spot color, you'd have to change the standard right here. But it is quite possible. Any other questions? I lost my Q&A.
No. We're very good. A lot of positive responses and great attendance.
Okay. I think we're gonna
Thank you, everyone.
Yep. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for tuning in.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Jim.
Thanks, Ed.